And welcome back to EDH Deck Building. I am your host, Demo, and this is 10 cards you should be putting in your Commander decks, episode 52. And we are starting out this week with Primal Force Mage, 2 and a green elf shaman. Whenever another creature enters the battlefield under your control, that creature gets +3/+3 until end of turn. So that seems really good, but of course people will notice right away, okay, well when my creature enters the battlefield, it gets that bump, but it doesn't have haste, so what good is that going to do? Well, of course, if you have a deck where your creatures are going to have haste, like a Samut deck, for example, fantastic fit, right? So any creature entering the battlefield is going to get that +3/+3, and then you'll be able to attack with it right away. Huge boon there. In any aggro strategy in green where you have a haste enabler, it's going to be fantastic. Also works really good with a Warstorm Surge Terror of the Peaks strategy as well. You can stack the triggers here where your creature enters the battlefield, gets the +3/+3, and then the Warstorm Surge is going to deal the damage. So it's a great fit if you have a deck like that. It's a really unique, interesting card. Coming in at number 2 is Price of Glory, 2 and a red enchantment. Whenever a player taps a land for mana, if it's not that player's turn, destroy that land. This card is somewhat infamous in certain circles. Like, I'm not sure how many people know this card exists. I have seen it in a Commander game before. It really hates on those control strategies, especially counterspells, obviously, because you're always casting those on opponents' turns. You pay 2 mana for that counterspell, and now you have to destroy those lands that you just tapped to cast it. That's absolutely brutal. So it doesn't completely shut down counterspells or control, but it really makes your opponents pay for it. And that's sort of what I like about this card. I know people don't like stuff like this because it is land destruction, but it's not forcing anyone to do anything, right? This is the kind of effects that I actually like to counter those strategies, right? For all the people out there that just can't stand those counterspell or control strategies, this is a great card for that because it's not actually destroying anyone's land. You're leaving the choice up to them. It's up to them whether or not they want to destroy their own lands by tapping them on your turn, right? So I actually think this is a very fair and balanced way to sort of hold back strategies like that. For me, myself, I have no problem seeing this in a casual game. Coming in at number 3, Priest of Yawgmoth, 1 and a black, Phyrexian human cleric, 1/2. Tap and sacrifice an artifact. Add an amount of black mana equal to the sacrificed artifact's mana value. So it's a black mana dork, sort of, right? It's also in an artifact theme. Very unique, right? There's definitely not a lot of cards doing stuff like this. How many people are out there playing black artifact decks? I mean, there's probably quite a few. It's not super typical, but if you're in that black artifact theme, this is pretty good. I can sacrifice that artifact, get a bunch of mana out of it, maybe recur it again if you're in an artifact recursion theme. That's Silas deck. I think it might be a good fit there where I can sacrifice it, get some mana, cast it again from my graveyard at a later time. Just a nice sort of ritual effect, right? That you can get that big mana boost to cast something. And also, if you want to be sacrificing artifacts, of course, it's extra good. Coming in at number 4, Proclamation of Rebirth, 2 and a white sorcery. Return up to 3 target creature cards with mana value 1 or less from your graveyard to the battlefield, and has the not often seen forecast ability. Pay 5 and a white, reveal Proclamation of Rebirth from your hand, return target creature card with mana value 1 or less from your graveyard to the battlefield. And you can only activate that during your upkeep and only once each turn. So obviously there's a couple ways to use this card because there's a couple of ways to use this card, right? You can just forecast this on your turn. Now 6 mana is a lot to get 1 creature out of a graveyard, but if you have a strategy where there's that creature that has a mana value of 1 that you want to be getting back over and over and over again, that can be usable. I just think this is a great recursion card in white. 3 mana to get 3 creatures out of a graveyard is incredible. Of course, they can only be mana value 1 or less, but there's lots of great creatures in the format that are mana value 1 or less. Just in white alone, you got cards like Serra Ascendant and Esper Sentinel. Those are 1 mana value creatures that you probably are going to want to get back from the graveyard, and your opponents are probably going to want to kill. If you're in that deck that just has lots of low mana value creatures, this is a fantastic recursion spell. Coming in at number 5 is Proteus Staff, 3 mana artifact. Pay 2 and a blue. Tap, put target creature on the bottom of its owner's library. That creature's controller reveals cards from the top of their library until they reveal a creature card. The player puts the card onto the battlefield. Then the rest on the bottom of their library in any order activate only as a sorcery. There is just so much going on with this card. I know it doesn't seem like much. It's a polymorph effect, right? We have a lot of effects like this in blue. There's some in red where you basically kill your opponent's creature and then they reveal some random thing off the top of their library. Or you can do it on yourself, right? I can tuck my own creature, maybe get something on top, right? So that's one of the ways you can use this. You can use this as a removal option if you want to, right? And this is why I love cards like this in a commander deck, because if you're in that desperate situation where your opponent has an Elesh Norn or a Vorinclex that you really badly need to get off the table, this is a way to do it. They're going to get some random creature off the top of their library, but probably isn't going to be any worse than the thing you're getting rid of, right? So it is a benefit. Also using it on yourself, right? And if you're in a deck where you can manipulate the top of your library, that's pretty fantastic. You have a tiny little creature in play, maybe even a token in play, and you know you got a big guy on top of your library, you can easily cheat it into play for 3 mana. I also like this card, and this is a particularly funny way to use it in a partner with deck, right? One of the things about partner with is that when you cast one of the partners, you have the ability to go get the other one out of your library and put it into your hand. But of course, it's in your command zone typically, so you're never going to use that. I actually like this where you have one partner that you can tuck on the bottom of your library and get a free creature into play. And then when you cast the other partner, you can then go search your library for it and put it back in your hand. I think that's actually pretty decent. If you have any partner withs in blue, this might be a good fit for that reason. The other thing that makes this card entirely unique is that you put the rest of the cards on the bottom of your library in any order, and a lot of people have built decks around this, where if you don't have any creatures in your library, okay, and so say your commander, for example, is your only creature, you cast your commander and then you tuck it on the bottom of your library, you will reveal cards from the top of your library until you reveal a creature card, and then put that card into play. And of course, if you tuck your only creature on the bottom of your library, that's the creature that you're going to reveal. You're going to reveal your entire library until you get to that last card, put it back into play. This works particularly good in a Fibblethip The Lost deck, because when it enters the battlefield, if it entered from your library, you can draw 2 cards. So that actually works good there. But the big thing here is that you're stacking your entire library, right? Because you're revealing your entire library and then putting those cards on the bottom in any order, you can now stack your entire library. This card's been used in, I think, a couple of different formats with this strategy, where I now decide the order of my entire library. Can be a little annoying, right? Having a guy sit there and reorder his entire library while everyone else has to stand around and watch. Not exactly super exciting, but it is an option for you if you want to do it. Coming in at number 6 is Psychic Spiral. 4 and a blue instant. Shuffle all cards from your graveyard into your library. Target player mills that many cards. This is actually a very unique and interesting card. Obviously, the typical way to use this is you shuffle all cards from your graveyard into your library and you have some opponent mill a bunch of cards. So it can be great in a milling strategy where you want your opponent to mill a bunch. Also can be great against a milling strategy, obviously, because you're shuffling all the cards from your graveyard into your library. It also can be really, really good in a self-mill strategy because you're milling yourself, right? Say there's a bunch of stuff you want in your graveyard, but now your library is getting really low. Don't want to kill yourself. So you shuffle all the cards from your graveyard into your library and then have some other player mill that many cards. You might even kill them by doing so. And then also in the self-mill strategy, I can mill like say 40 cards because again, I want stuff in my graveyard, obviously. Maybe I'm in that Sidisi deck and I'm creating those zombie tokens. Now I can shuffle my graveyard into my library and target player mills that many cards, which means I can target myself, right? So I can shuffle 40 cards back into my library and then mill 40 cards immediately again because I want cards in my graveyard, obviously, right? So it works really great that way as well, where it's a good way to mill yourself for a whole bunch of cards. Maybe you're in that Slogurk deck where you have a ton of lands in your graveyard. You can shuffle them into your library and then mill yourself for a whole ton. Put a whole ton of counters on your commander. Really great fit there. I put that in my version of a Slogurk deck. So I know this card doesn't look like much, but it's actually doing quite a bit. And there is a lot of different directions you can go with it. Coming in at number 7, Psychic Possession. 2 blue, enchantment Aura, enchant opponent. You skip your draw step, which isn't great, but whenever enchanted opponent draws a card, you may draw a card. This is really a great card that I think you could put in almost any deck. And the reason being is because you're always going to have that one player that's probably going to be drawing a lot of cards. Maybe you can even see it on their commander, right? Someone's playing a Corval deck or a Niv Mizzet deck or something. You're going to want to put this on them because they're going to be drawing a ton of cards and you're going to do so as well. The downside for this card is almost negligible, like it's almost nothing, because you're skipping your draw step, which means you only skip the one draw that you would normally draw on your turn. You still get to draw normally every other way if you have Heuristic Study or something like that. And then if your opponent has Heuristic Study, you're going to draw off all theirs as well, right? I think it's extra good in your deck where you're maybe skipping your draw step. A Taigam Sidisi's Hand is one deck where you're doing that, where you're going to be skipping your draw step anyway. Damia obviously as well. This works really well because you're going to be skipping your draw step anyway. So now the downside is literally not there at all. Really think this card should see a lot more play. Coming in at number 8 is Psychogenic Probe, 2-mana artifact. Whenever a spell or ability causes a player to shuffle their library, Psychogenic Probe deals 2 damage to that player. So I gave this card a mention in my So You Hate Tutoring video, because if you're in a play group where you got a lot of opponents that are tutoring all the time, just making them take 2 damage every single time can be good. And again, the ramping, this includes that, right? All those decks that want to be ramping all the time, they're going to be shuffling their library all the time, so they're going to be taking 2 damage from it. And I like effects like this because, again, just like with the Price of Glory, you're not actually stopping your opponents from doing anything. That can draw a lot of hate. Casting that Aven Mind Sensor or that opposition agent can really draw you a lot of hate, and your opponents will concentrate heavily on either killing you or removing your creatures so that they can search their library. Psychogenic Probe isn't stopping anyone from doing anything. It is allowing them to do it. It's just punishing them for it. And that can really be sneaky good in a lot of games. You plop this down on turn 2, and your opponent, they're going to take 2 damage when they crack that fetch land. I guess actually they'll take 3, but they're not going to really care. You know, a lot of people won't care about 2 damage, but it's going to eat away at them and without them really noticing, I think, which can be really, really good. Obviously, this is going to affect you as well, but if you don't have a lot of that stuff going on in your deck, you could just chuck this in there, and I think you'll find it can be very effective. While we're on the topic of hating on that tutoring, Psychic Surgery is a personal favorite of mine that I think is fantastic. 1 and a blue enchantment. Whenever an opponent shuffles their library, you may look at the top 2 cards of that library. You may exile one of those cards, then put the rest on top of that library in any order. So again, this is shuffling library. So it's not necessarily tutoring, it's ramping, it's anything. Anytime your opponent shuffles their library. And there, of course, are ways for you to make your opponent shuffle their library as well. So you could play into that strategy also. You're just controlling your opponent's draws here, which is really good. You look at those top 2 cards and you go, oh, well, I'll give them a land. They can have that, right? So you really are controlling what your opponents are drawing. You can exile some really important stuff. This works extra good against any tutor that puts it on top of the library. And of course, those are the most powerful ones, right? The Mystical Tutor and the Vampiric Tutor. Those are like the most powerful tutors in the entire format. They're going to shuffle their library and then put it on top. This will trigger, and you get to look at the top 2 cards of the library, which of course, one of the cards they just searched for will be, and you can exile it. So this can prevent a lot of win cons. You can actually end up exiling their win con if they're not paying attention, right? Really great card for hating on strategies like that. But just a really great card, like value-y wise in general. My opponent just cast a Rampant Growth. Now I get to look at the top 2 cards and, oh, wouldn't you know, there's a Blightsteel Colossus on top of their library. I'll exile that. Or there's a Heuristic Study on top of their library. I'll exile that. Just can be really, really great that way. And coming in at number 10 this week is Psychic Battle. And this is another card that I talked about before. I talked about it in my crazy blue enchantments video. And, you know, while I was talking about it in that video, I started to realize how good this card really can be. To the point where I actually threw it in a deck of mine and play tested it with my patrons, and man, it is effective. So 3 blue enchantment. Whenever a player chooses 1 or more targets, each player reveals the top card of their library. The player who reveals the card with the highest mana value may change the target or targets. If 2 or more cards are tied for the highest, the target or targets remain unchanged. Changing targets this way doesn't trigger abilities of permanents named Psychic Battle. So you can see why I put this in that video of crazy enchantments, because the wording is just insane. It's really confusing when you read it out that way, but actually if you think about it, it's really quite simple. What happens is whenever a target is chosen for anything, each player is going to reveal the top card of their library. Whoever has the highest mana value card on top gets to choose the targets. And of course, that is an incredibly powerful ability. You don't even realize how powerful it is, okay? Even equipping something, that is targeting. Almost everything in the game is targeting. Like, it's incredible how often you are targeting. And when any of that stuff is done, you're going to get to pick the targets if you have that thing on top of your library that has the highest mana value. So obviously you want to build around this. It's tough. I think this card is powerful enough that you could build an entire deck around it. I honestly do. Get that Draco on top of your library, use a Sensei's Divining Top to keep it on top of your library, and for the rest of the game you get to choose the targets for everything. Really is a strategy that is worth building around, I think. But even if you have, you say, a deck where again you have that Sensei's Divining Top and you are manipulating the top of your library lots for other reasons, this can be really good as well, where maybe I'm just doing that strategy already. It is just an incredibly powerful effect to be able to control the targets for everything. You would be surprised how often it happens in a game. So I think this card is worth giving a serious look at to see if it fits in one of your decks. But that is it for today. That is 10 more cards you should be putting in your Commander decks. And if you are thinking of purchasing any of these cards, I have a TCG Player link. It is in the description below. Feel free to give it a click. It helps support the channel. But that is it for today, and thanks for tuning in.